my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by Needed. Needed is the leading women's health supplement brand recommended by nutritionally trained practitioners. While most perinatal supplements include the bare minimum of the nutrients needed during pregnancy, Needed's products are based on the latest clinical research and in-practice experience of nearly 4,000 practitioners. Needed has all your needs covered, from your prenatal vitamin to pregnancy-specific pre- and probiotics to egg quality support, sleep, stress, immune, and hydration support, as well as your protein needs for blood sugar balance and postpartum healing. I'm a huge fan of Needed's Complete Plan, which delivers unparalleled nourishment for every phase, whether you're trying to conceive, pregnant, or postpartum. Instead of having to pair 6 different products together to meet your needs, I love that Needed has simplified things by bundling together 4 core products you need in an easy and flexible monthly plan. Needed's 4-part complete plan includes their prenatal multi, their vegan omega-3, their pregnancy-specific pre- and probiotic with targeted strains to support you and your baby's microbiome, and their ethically and sustainably sourced collagen protein that mixes easily into just about everything. Needed's complete plan truly meets all of your micronutrient, microbiome, and protein needs. Save 20% off your first order of Needed's complete plan or any of their other perinatal nutrition products at thisisneeded.com with the code BIRTHHOUR. I've been using and loving the complete plan, and at the end of this episode, I chat with Needed co-founder Julie all about what makes Needed's products unique. It's a really great conversation, and you'll definitely want to listen to the end for a special giveaway announcement. And remember that coupon code is BIRTHHOUR at thisisneeded.com for 20% off your first order. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. And last thing before we get to the episode, we also want to share that we have a Patreon page. This has been going for about 7 years now, and it's a place where you can support the Birth Hour, but you get fun perks in return, like access to over 600 additional birth stories that are not in your main podcast feed, and of course, membership in our private Facebook group at the $5 a month or more level. This is the best place on the internet. You hear people talk about it a lot on the podcast. It's a great place to get support, find friendship, get questions answered, and connect over our love of birth stories. So check that out at patreon.com/birthhour. All right, today's birth story guest is Sarah, and you may know her as The Bird's Papaya on Instagram. If not, you should definitely go look that up right now because she is a great account to follow, especially if you're in the phase of motherhood. Today, Sarah's going to be talking about her most recent home birth experience, but it's also a really great conversation just in general about prenatal and postnatal mental health and just navigating being a working mom. Lots of different great things come up in this conversation, so I'm excited to share with you Sarah's story. All right, let's hear from Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so honored. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear your whole pregnancy birth journey. I know we're going to focus a lot on your more recent birth, but before we get to all that, can you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Yeah, so I am 38 years old. I have been a creator for 15 years now. I started, in blogging and then went into social media, and really only it became a business in the last 5 years. So I've really gone through a lot of it, and a lot of what drove my more known work has been unpacking postpartum, which was something that I ended up doing about 8 years postpartum after my third child, who I had at the age of 25. So I didn't really start to unpack a lot of what birth and body changes and the lack of representation of postpartum bodies was until I was in my 30s. And it sort of drove a lot of conversations for me. And then not like a full surprise, but maybe a little bit of awe, I did find myself pregnant again at age 35 and gave birth just after my 36th birthday.
Yeah, I had a kind of age gap as well. And it feels like a whole different ball game, like the pregnancy, the birth, especially for me, the postpartum. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be a slip and slide by the fourth. And I remember the midwives were like, the body kind of resets after about 10 years. And I was like, oh no, we're doing it from scratch. But yeah, the pregnancy took me out. The postpartum, I was like, gosh, this is so different. But I also am like, it's just been so long. Maybe I just didn't remember. Maybe it just, Who knows, right? I thought that I had age at my benefit when I was in my 20s. I had 3 kids by the time I was 25. So I really had the age on my side. So I did find it was a little bit more difficult going into it in my 30s. But I also was only having one this time as opposed to the other ones, which were very back to back.
Right. Yeah, I found I enjoyed my postpartum more with having older kids because I just soaked up all the newborn stuff. I mean, there was definitely the highs and lows, which we'll get to all that when we get to your story. But yeah.
Definitely another level of appreciation.
For sure.
I think everyone sort of always says to you, oh my gosh, it goes by so fast, and like try and treasure it. And those are usually people that are so much further down the road. I used to always hear that and go, well, yeah, I'm ready for it to hurry up and go so fast. But to sit and have a newborn baby and a 15-year-old, like a 10 to 15-year-old older kids, you were like, oh my gosh, it goes by so fast. I just want to sit in this a little bit more, even when there is like the discomfort and all of the change. I feel like I've relished it a lot more this time.
Yeah. Okay, so I know you want to give us a little bit of background context as far as your first 3 births. So let's take you back to those.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And just kind of share the types of birth you were planning, maybe like kind of what you knew about pregnancy and birth at that time, and then we'll come more towards your more recent home birth.
Sure. So I was 20 when I got pregnant with my first, and I remember just thinking that it wasn't going to be this big event. At the time, the show on TLC was out called I Didn't Know I Was Pregnant. And I just decided in my head that that's what the experience was going to be like, that I was going to stand in the shower and a baby was going to just fall out of me. I thought if people could be so surprised that they're pregnant in the first place, surely birth can't be that intense. And so I was at the time, this is going back 17 years ago, there was not common practice for midwives, but I could not get in with an OB. And so I went to the midwives and had my labor and delivery with them. But things were very different back then. You couldn't have an epidural and stay under midwife care. So going into birth, I had planned no medical intervention whatsoever. I made it to 2 centimeters before I was absolutely bawling my eyes out. My water had broken in the early morning and it just was so intense. I didn't realize that your water breaking could mean a more intense labor. And so I went into it really expecting that I was not going to ask for any medication and asked for it pretty much right off the bat. And ended up having like a completely numb birth where I actually was ineffectively pushing to the point that I ended up having an episiotomy, which the midwives at the time recognized that the doctor was very rushed between me and another laboring mother. And the episiotomy was probably not necessary, but more of a time thing. And because the midwives were not able to do my care by choosing an epidural, I was put in the position of having an episiotomy. And I was very young. There wasn't a lot of conversations and stuff around postpartum care. All of it just made me so uncomfortable. I remember they passed me the baby and I was like, she's covered in something. Like, can we get her cleaned up? Like, it just all icked me out. I remember going to like the breastfeeding courses and it was all about like everything just really, really overwhelmed me to give context. But I ended up having a very long recovery because I was too afraid to ask for anybody to check my stitches. I ended up having like a really infected injury. And my recovery was about a year before I stopped feeling pain every single day whenever I stood up. And by the time that it was like that 1 year mark, I found myself pregnant with my second.
I was just about to say, you mentioned they were close together.
Yeah. So I ended up my second, I went in again thinking this time I need to have the epidural. This has to be the way. And I had it. And my labor was progressing a lot faster as it was my second. That is pretty typical. And I ended up, the epidural did not take. And that really threw me for a loop because I wasn't prepared for it at all. And so going into my third, I had in a different city, and this time was with an OB. And when I had my second, the midwives are very good at helping me not re-injure myself. So they really massaged the baby out. I had very, very minimal tearing. It was a beautiful experience beyond the epidural not working. So my third, I go in again with, okay, get the epidural right away. Again, the epidural does not take. They tried 7 times. It did not take. And they had broken my water because I failed a non-stress test. There was meconium in the water. So the birth became a little bit more complicated. And I remember I got to the point of having to push. I only had about 20 minutes of active labor. This was all going very, very quickly. And I looked at the doctor and I said, are you going to help massage the baby out? And she looked at me and said, we don't touch you during this. And I was so thrown and immediately went into a bit of a spiral where this baby came out and my body went into shock almost immediately. And I just felt so... I mean, I was grateful. Everything worked out. Everything was fine. You have your baby, but I never really processed what it felt to feel out of control all 3 times and have all 3 times sort of surprise me in ways that I wasn't entirely prepared for. But again, this is all in my past. This is all things that just you got to put away into the past and never really deal with until I got pregnant with 10 and a half years later, and I'm pregnant with number 4. And suddenly all of those experiences came flooding back in fear, in terror. And there were some complications in pregnancy number 4. And I also ended up with prenatal depression, which was not something I'd ever heard anybody speak of before. I didn't know it existed. I couldn't figure out why I just wasn't happy the way everybody else was happy, why I wasn't bonding, why I was so terrified of birth. So that was my introduction into 4th pregnancy and the reality of these old birth stories really living within my body and came right back to the surface.
Yes, I hear that a lot. You figured out you had prenatal depression at some point.
Yeah.
What was that process like? And was there anything that helped?
Yeah, I actually went to a therapist that specialized in perinatal mental health. And again, didn't know that these were things, didn't know that this was anything, and really got for the first time to really talk about those first births and talk about the things that maybe I had compartmentalized that I decided was not something that I needed to talk about or digest. And so it really all came, and I think it would have come out a different way, even if it wasn't birth again. I think it would have come out in any type of medical interventions in my life. I think it would have come out in any sort of changes that I maybe was experiencing with my health. It just really came to the surface. So there was a couple different things. I had experienced bleeding at about 16 weeks. I ended up having placenta previa, and there was some ovarian cysts. The baby had cysts on their brain, and I had an issue with the cord. It just felt like I blanked when all of that happened. And I became very removed from the pregnancy mentally. At the same time, I had friends who were pregnant alongside me and unfortunately lost their babies. And that just really triggered this whole, I'm not in control. And on top of that, I have to, somehow brace myself for the reality of birth. Even if I somehow in my head thought I was never going to get there, there was still the reality of, oh my gosh, I have to push out a baby and I don't want to do it. I was struggling with that a lot. And so working with a perinatal mental health specialist, she really worked with me to create 4 different birth plans so that I would feel like I had some sort of not control over every situation, but I had consent to a lot of things, that I was understanding, and I had at least my word being put into some of these stories and these different plans. So I had a home birth plan. I had a hospital birth plan without medication. I had a hospital birth plan with medication, and I had an emergency C-section plan. And so I had 4 birth plans in place. I had never made a birth plan before. And it was a really fascinating process for me, and allowed me to sort of bring some peace to the reality that my first 3 felt so out of control and so outside of anything that I really understood what was happening.
Yeah. And did you do that more as an exercise to kind of process and feel control, or was it something you planned to actually like print out and hand over to care providers?
I did have it like ready to go. Did I print them out? I think I did actually. But there was a point at which I really decided I wanted a home birth.
Yeah.
A lot of it was pandemic based because I'm in Canada. There was a lot of lockdowns.
Right.
My last delivery being only 20 minutes of active labor. There was this fear that if this was going to be me and my now husband's only child together, I was so afraid of being separated at any point, which there was when you got to triage, you got separated for a moment before you went into your labor delivery and then got reunited. And that little bit of gap of time was enough for me to say, okay, I just want to figure out if I can do a home birth, because I just don't want that separation. I want to be with my family. I want to try being at home. And I started to really face the fears I had about birth. I started following pages that showed you birth, like really up close birth.
Yeah.
And it made me like just realize more and more, even though I was scared to come face to face with birth, it made me really acknowledge it and really admire it and see the potential. And so that really started to change my heart towards a home birth and really fight for that. And that meant, I mean, I'm anemic. I had to do a lot to try and get my iron levels up. I had to root for that placenta to move. There was a lot of unknowns until the later weeks of pregnancy before, I think it was actually a week before I truly got clearance for it.
Oh, wow.
Those 4 birth plans were a constant. They were a constant reality for me.
Yeah, that's wild. So a week before is when you were cleared for a home birth?
Yeah, I had to get my iron levels up or I was not going to be allowed to do a home birth. Yeah.
Well, that comes up actually a lot on the podcast. So if you have any tips for what you did to get your iron levels up, I'm sure people are taking notes.
Yeah, I mean, there was a liquid iron that I took, and I also took a different type of iron. Apparently, I don't absorb non-heme iron well, which is the way that you would get iron from vegetables, essentially. I wasn't absorbing that. So I ended up going on to a heme iron supplement, which helped me absorb it way, way faster. There's Lucky Iron Fish, which exists. It helps you kind of boil water. Like you can cook with it. So it makes your water infused with iron. And then I also had this really awful, disgusting liquid iron. But I mean, I chugged that stuff. I remember my husband just looking at me being like, you got to do it or we don't get to do this.
Was it Floridix?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I had to do that too. I told my husband it tasted like bloody pennies.
Yeah, that's exactly what it tastes like. And when you're pregnant, everything's already so disgusting in taste, except for like the 3 things you like.
Yes.
So I remember just being like, I cannot believe this is like the last thing I have to do. Like I was just...
It works fast though.
It did. It worked really fast. It did for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's good that you got that up. So throughout your pregnancy, were you doing like co-care with a home birth midwife and then OB, or how'd that look?
No. So I only ever had an OB when I lived in a different city, and access to midwives was almost impossible. So but I'm living back in my hometown. I actually got to go back to the midwives who did my first deliveries too, which was really neat, even though it was a new pod of midwives. One of the midwives was a woman who delivered a lot of my sisters, and I attended, my sister has 6 kids. I attended 3 or 4 of my sister's births. And so I recognized her and I knew her, and my sister had a lot to say about her. But because we were also in a pandemic, you didn't really see your midwife very often. We didn't have in-person appointments. And so I only had, I think, 3 or 4 appointments before heading into those final weeks where I even saw my midwife. And at that point, even though I had a team of 3, I had gotten so close with this one midwife that I was so scared again of like, oh my gosh, what if I don't give birth on the day that you're on? And I remember she looked at me and she was like, listen, I don't really like to cross boundaries between personal life and work, but if you go into labor and I'm available, I will come to your birth. And that ended up being something that did happen. It did work out. And, so it was really special to have that person that I had so much admiration for. And I think I had bonded with during the pregnancy, which was honestly isolating. I think I'm so happy watching people go through experiences again that I was sort of robbed with, because I didn't get to have my husband at any appointments. Mm-hmm. We didn't get very many appointments at all. It was a very isolating experience, especially in the times where I'm bleeding and I'm rushing to the midwife's office and my husband wasn't able to be with me. Those were some really hard times. And that now make a lot of sense as to why I ended up struggling so much mentally during the pregnancy.
Yeah, the COVID restrictions, I mean, for those hard times, and then also for not getting to share the exciting things together too, like certain ultrasounds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So hard. Especially, I feel like for you, it'd be like a double whammy of like, you know, like you said, your first time experiencing it with him and this huge break between, kind of like a second chance situation. And then like, oh yeah, global pandemic, of course. That's really hard.
Well, and I got pregnant at the beginning of it. So I just don't think in any world I imagined that we'd still be there.
Right.
So it was a lot of grief in sort of like real time of having to let go of the ideas of what it would be to give birth in this situation, and really having to let go. And one of my best friends was pregnant at the same time with twins, and the isolation that we got from each other when we were so excited to be pregnant at the same time, and there was no baby showers, there was no being together. It was like seeing each other on the sidewalk and kind of waving hi. And there was a couple weeks here and there where we maybe got a shot, and then it would be right back into a lockdown. So giving birth and like when I had my son, this came up a lot too, is I was living 6 hours away from my friends and family. So I have done the giving birth and not having anybody come to visit for days. And that was hard. So then to be in that position again, where I'm like, oh my God, I didn't get to have visitors. I didn't get to see anybody. It was like all over again. It wasn't the redemptive experience that I had maybe thought it would be for those things, but also in some ways a blessing. I got to have a different postpartum too.
Yeah. I've heard some silver lining type stories about the postpartum as far as kind of having your cocoon protected during that time. But okay, so let's go ahead and talk about how labor started for you.
Yeah, so I had that delightful prodromal labor, which I think was a lot of me, because I was like trying to not be in control, but also being in control. And you think that you can just will it out. I was doing everything in my power to try and have that baby because I wanted that one midwife there. I did miss my window of her being on shift, but I was really encouraging labor. I'd gone for a stretch and sweep. Then I went home and I was pumping and it was working. I was getting these like what felt like productive cramps that were turning into labor. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and I would start to time them. And then all of a sudden I'd wake up 3 hours later and go, oh, I guess it stopped. And this went on for a couple of days where I kept being like, oh my gosh, it's happening. And that one day it had been a really active night of like timing these contractions, all this stuff. And so I was pretty tired at this point. And my midwife kind of recommended that I go back to bed, get some sleep and get prepared, because we didn't know which way this was going to go. And she really prepared me for this could be a couple weeks or it might be a couple days. We really, really don't know. And I felt really different. I had lost my mucus plug. Everything was showing in a good direction. So my midwife agreed to come over and do another stretch and sweep and told me, you know what, you're going to cramp and we're going to see if this goes one way or another. So she left and I had that cramping as expected. And my contractions, I mean, I still look back on them and I'm so glad that I trusted my gut, because it can be really hard when you get so hypersensitive to everything during pregnancy and you feel like you're over asking for help. I mean, I called the midwives hotline multiple times thinking that something was up. And I just remember it was like 11-minute contractions, and it would be 2 minutes apart, and then 3 minutes apart, and then 30 seconds apart, and then 4 minutes apart. And when those 30-second ones started to happen, I was like, they're all over the place. Like, I know they're not steadying out, but I think this might be it. Like, I think it could be. And so we started getting prepared. They agreed to come back over and check me, even though nobody was really convinced that I would be in labor because this had been going on for a couple of days. She came back and she checked me and she said, "You're 5 to 6 centimeters." So all that day, even though it just seemed like it was cramping after that stretch and sweep, was actually finally productive labor. And I went into labor, and about 2.5 hours into labor, I got checked again. And I remember they said, "You're 7 centimeters." And I was just gutted because this is my first fully chosen unmedicated. And I remember looking at that bag at the front door, being so intensely uncomfortable. And the last thing I wanted to do was get in a car and drive to the hospital. Even though I felt like I was hitting that wall, I had one friend who had done something similar where she had 3 kids in hospital and then had her 4th at home. And she said to me, "Listen, the second you feel like you're hitting a wall, your baby is about to come." And so I am holding on to the one thing that she said to me. And I know everybody else's experiences are so different, but for whatever reason, I just really held on to that hope that maybe it's actually closer than we think, even though it's 7 centimeters. And so I was laboring between my sofa and then getting into the tub. And I remember the midwife looked at me and said, "I want you to try, instead of tensing up whenever you're having a contraction, I want you to ease into it." And shockingly enough, I started falling asleep in between the contractions. There's photos of me in the birth tub where I'm literally, my eyes are closed and I'm out of it. I'm truly just having these tiny little mini naps between these contractions that are anywhere from, 30 seconds to 5 minutes apart. And then that really, really helped. I honestly would say that reduced my pain significantly. And the water was lovely because it allowed me to sort of float and not tense up those muscles, to really work on just relaxing through it, which is so counterintuitive. We're so used to pain. You're not supposed to feel pain. So pain in the body and having to lean into it was such a challenge, but surprisingly effective. And then they encouraged me to sort of change positions because even though I was 7 centimeters, it was almost entirely in the back. And so they said, "What if you get on your hands and knees for a minute in the water and just see if we can get rid of that front end of the cervix?" And so I got on my hands and knees and immediately felt the urge to push. And it was like nothing I've ever experienced before. It was like a train coming that I couldn't stop. And I was terrified because I knew that pushing with a cervix still there was going to be damaging and potentially swell up and delay this whole process. But they checked me while I was on my hands and knees. And sure enough, I had become fully dilated. Even within that 1 minute of me changing positions, it immediately triggered into pushing. So they gave me the option of being on my hands and knees or being in whatever position I wanted. And because I'm just so old school in the sense of what I wanted what I wanted the experience to look like, I was just thinking I don't want my husband looking at my butthole right now. I need to be on my back. I just have to do it this way. And my sister was actually attending the birth as well to take photos. And I was like, that can't be the shot. It was such a weird moment, but I was like, I got to go on my back. And they were like, okay. And so I started to push and I felt baby's head come out and then baby kick and shoot right back in. And that was what the heck just happened? And I was just so focused on, this had been such a complicated pregnancy and so hard and just everything felt like it was a lot. And I'd been so sick all the way up to the end. I didn't get the second trimester, no more sickness. I had it all the way through. And I remember in that moment of pushing, it didn't matter how painful it was or how much that burning sensation was there. All I could think about was, it's finally going to be over. You did it. You got to the end. And I did one really big push and out she came. So it turned out that she had the cord wrapped around her body and around her neck, which they got untangled really fast. But essentially that's why the baby, Lemmy, she kicked and went back in because she was resisting what must have felt like constriction against her body.
Yeah.
So she came out, she had eyes open, looking right at us. It was an incredible moment. I had very minimal stitching. I handed her off. We did the placenta birth. We did a placenta tour. My kids were there. It was such a cool moment. And then I gave birth at 9:45 and everything was cleaned up and tucked away. And I was tucked in bed with my baby by midnight. And that's when I really was like, oh my gosh, this was such a beautiful experience. And I felt so much obligation to tell people that there was a different type of birth, while also trying to dance that line of everybody has their own story and everybody has their own experiences. But I just wish that there was more positive stories around choosing home birth and the sense of advocacy that you have in your home. And even if you don't have it at home, being able to bring that with you into the hospital. I remember my prenatal teacher, one thing, which I had never taken a prenatal class before. I was like, here I am at my fourth kid learning about how to give birth. But it was really cool. And the one thing she said is when you're in a hospital, you ask permission to get up and go to the bathroom. But when you're at home, you just get up and go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
So no matter where you are, remember that. Remember that everyone's there for you. You can sort of move around, ask for what you need, ask for, advocate for yourself, and then let other people know how to advocate for you. But being in my home was the first time I really didn't ask permission. I just said what I needed at all points. And it felt like everyone was sort of a guest in my space. So they were really there for me. And even if it was in a hospital, I would hope that I could have mimicked that same experience, because that really changed the way I felt after birth, because I felt supported. Being tucked into bed and handed your baby was one of the more beautiful experiences of my entire life.
Yeah, that's such a good point about just like getting up and doing it. I mean, a lot of times at the hospital, you have all these wires and things attached to you and stuff, so it makes it trickier. But I think the main thing is people just don't, like you said, don't have that comfort level.
Yeah.
You're in a space you're not used to, surrounded by, oftentimes we view medical professionals as kind of the ones in charge, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I love that you had that comfort, and it helps the labor move along as well when you feel that comfortable.
It did. And I will say that one midwife that I really adored, she walked in the house, I want to say at like 9:40. So I gave birth at 9:45. And there's a photo of her. My eyes are still closed because I'm like just in this zone. I felt like every time I opened my eyes, it was too much. So I really just had my eyes closed, and I felt her come and put her hand on my head and on my shoulder. And then she looked at Shane and said, like, you good? And he was, yeah. And then out the baby came. So she really came in that last moment, but it was so special to see her there. We still are friends on Instagram, and it's been like, I look at that first photo where I've given birth, and I see this group of women and my husband there. And it was just such a beautiful experience when you feel so supported and so empowered, as opposed to scared and out of control, which I recognize now is a lot of people's experience when you don't feel like you have any control over the situation and that you are somehow indebted to whatever happens. And so I'm really grateful, even though the best case scenario, my number one birth, plan worked out. I'm also really glad that I had plans for everything else. And I would hope that I could come away with that same experience of I felt really loved and supported and empowered through this. And it didn't have to be scary. It didn't have to be traumatizing. It doesn't have to be ever. I think if I want to say that to anybody going through birth, is to really lean into those fears, really talk about the stuff that scares you, and not let people just hush it away with, well, at least you got a good baby out of it. At least, everyone's healthy and okay, because that birth trauma that you experience will live on within you and change the way that you carry on in other circumstances in life. And that became very, very true for me.
Yeah. You're a great example of having to process all of that before having that experience that was empowering. So I'm sure you were even more aware of it in the moment than we might be if it's all kind of, like you said, 3 births right in a row. There's not much time to kind of look back and process.
Yeah. And two to that. So one thing with prenatal depression was I really struggled to bond with baby. And I think that was a bit of protectiveness on my own side. If I felt like I cared too much, then it felt like something I could lose. And so I really had guarded myself. And at one point I was expressing this to a friend and she said, well, have you ever bonded with your liver? And I was like, no. And she's like, well, sometimes that can be how pregnancy feels. It just feels like something in your body and you don't necessarily know it. You just have dreams of it, but you don't have that experience yet. So it's okay that you're not bonding with it, just like it's okay that you haven't bonded with your liver yet. You're still caring for it. You're still doing the things. You're still acting in love for your body during this time. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, I don't have to, maybe I don't know their personality and I don't know what things are going to look like yet, but like, it's okay. I'm not like a monster for not feeling completely bonded to this object what it felt like an object in my body that had sort of taken over my life and changed it drastically. But the beautiful part about that is the second she came out, I felt immediately bonded. And I wish that I'd had more hope for that during the pregnancy, because I really did feel like I was almost a surrogate for everybody else's excitement and joy. I felt so separate from it, even though I was participant in the plan. There was part of me that was like excited, but I just couldn't get there. I didn't feel like I knew who this little being was. And that was really hard for me to digest and admit and talk about. But also a very big part of prenatal depression is that you might feel very void from some of these things. So birth was a very redemptive experience from prenatal depression and those previous birth traumas as well. And I think due to the work that I did during my pregnancy, I did not experience postpartum depression, which I was a big precursor for. And that's not to say, hurrah, I'm really good at mental health. It just was a really nice outcome from a very difficult pregnancy.
Yeah. And I think we always give so much space for the partners to like bond with the baby on their own timeline.
Yeah.
And then we just expect that the moms are going to right away because they were pregnant. And like you said, it's not necessarily that same mind-body experience for everyone. So,
yeah.
That is, I know that the statistics are much higher for postpartum depression if you've had it prenatally. So that's awesome that it sounds like you were able to kind of do the work while pregnant and then had a better outcome. So let's talk about your postpartum.
Sure. So postpartum for me was, pretty expected. There was a lot of relief, to be honest. I remember standing up after giving birth and my husband looked at me and he goes, "Oh my gosh, you just stood up." And I was like, I know, because I literally couldn't. I was so done by the end of pregnancy. I couldn't do almost anything unassisted. And so I felt so much freedom in my postpartum that I was like, oh my gosh, like this is kind of cool that you're on the other side of it. It no longer was like building up to an injury. It was like, okay, we're injured. We can take care of this. We can do this dang thing. I'm a huge fan of the padsicles that Freedom Mom makes. Those were great. I also really loved their postpartum underwear, the mesh stuff. Was really, really awesome. I think maybe because I had catastrophized everything going wrong, everything just sort of felt like it was happening as it should. Also because I had been not allowed to have any sort of activity during my pregnancy, I felt really comfortable being still in my postpartum. I remember my midwife saying, you get to go up and down the stairs twice a day, so choose it wisely. And I remember feeling really good one day, and I did the stairs too many times and immediately had like passed a bunch of blood clots and was like, okay, right, we're still recovering and people recover in different times, but like I really needed to take it slow. And so that 6-week mark was a special one because I felt like it was turning a new leaf a little bit. I got to sort of go through the moving again and working myself up to other things. And we were very honest and very transparent about how I felt if I was open to having sex. Again, I was not able to have sex during pregnancy at all. So up until like the very end of it. So we had already gotten to a rhythm of like figuring out intimacy in other ways. So I felt really comfortable saying when I was ready and really easing into sex again. And so that was really nice as well. But one of my biggest things was postpartum was I really thought that I wasn't going to struggle with body image. I really didn't. And after birth, I felt like so empowered and so amazing. And then my body looked the same a year later. And then 2 years later, I was back up to the same weight I was before I gave birth. So I really came face to face with the reality of having a true bounce forward story, which was not going back to a pre-baby body that I had before I got pregnant with her. Even though my body already looked like it had given birth, I have stretch marks up to my rib cage. I was really thrown again, even though I was so prepared because I always gained weight postpartum. It was just natural for me because I had no appetite while pregnant to being breastfeeding and constantly hungry and really having to nourish myself. And so one of my biggest lessons in the last year has been really recognizing how many good, lovely, healthy things I've done for my body, and also acknowledging that it meant I'm not losing weight. I'm actually at the same weight I was before birth, and acknowledging that this is a really healthy state for me. This is a really good, positive thing, but also admitting and grieving through, which I think is something that a lot of women feel like they're not allowed to do, that you're not allowed to grieve the body you once had in order to accept the body you do. But I think it's one of the most, grief is a processing tool. So I think properly acknowledging and grieving and talking about my struggles was not something that erased the joy and the love and the happiness around the experience of it all. It wasn't erasing any of that. It just meant I was also having that. I was struggling. I was grieving over, the body, the life I had before baby. And I was also very, very happy for all of the change as well. So it's been a very wild couple of years, especially for somebody who speaks in the body confidence space, to really get thrown back in the arena of what it means to watch your body change that quickly, that fiercely, and really stay at that change even 2 years later, which is exactly where I am now.
Yeah. And I think that you've done, this because of the comments you get, but such a great job of sharing that journey on Instagram. And it must just be affirming for you and everyone who reads it to see all the comments of everyone being like, thank you for putting into words what I've been feeling and sharing your experience. So thank you so much for your work on Instagram, and your business in general is so great. I want to be sure to get to all that as well.
Yeah.
So as far as you said, at this point, you're 2 years out.
Yeah.
So where do you kind of feel as far as mental health and life with a baby after such a big age gap?
Yeah, it was a totally different experience this time. And I had to let go of a lot of who I was the first times around, because I was actually a stay-at-home mom for 10 years.
Okay.
And now I have a career, and I felt a lot of that pull in two different directions. I had this dream. I wanted to be with her all the time. And I also didn't want to lose my career and job. And I was so envious of my husband never having that battle until I talked to him and realized that he did too. He was still having those feelings of, I wish I could spend every day with her, and I have this obligation to go to work, and we have this financial need to do this, and I don't have less of a role or a love for my child because of that. And so we both were sort of in this position of, oh my goodness, how is this going to work out? One thing I really liked about how he approached it was he allowed me to sort of talk about it. And then also he was the one about 4 months in. I very much had this mentality of, I'm going to hold on to both dreams at the same time. And I talked about this. I was like, this is really hard, but I'm going to do both. And that I sort of hit a wall eventually. But as things went on, she was a cluster feeder, and she didn't like to be put down. So she kind of was a difficult newborn in that regard. And so this idea that I could, put her down for a couple hours and get a couple hours of work done became an impossibility pretty fast. So I eased myself back in as much as possible, but definitely didn't have more than a 6-week break from, full work. And so then when I came back, my husband was the first to recognize that I wasn't going to be able to just do this. And so he suggested that we get somebody to come in and help hold the baby so I could get some work done. And keep in mind, I've never had anybody watch my kids before except for me and my mom. So I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this, but he ended up putting up an ad for a nanny, and we had somebody come into the home 2 days a week just to help hold this baby. And I remember feeling, I looked at her and was like, I don't know how I feel about this. I haven't done this before. And we only really need it for a little bit of time because we have her registered for daycare once she turns 1. And she ended up becoming like a really integral part of our home. And I ended up like letting go of a lot of guilt and shame that I had around being that person who did it all, and really letting my husband do a lot, letting her take over certain aspects of, you know, what I felt it was to be a mom, and just things like holding my baby or helping with the dishes or the laundry. Just it allowed me so much more freedom. And I felt myself really coming alive again through that experience. Even though I really, really loved being a stay-at-home mom the first time, I wasn't willing to give up the 13 years I'd put into doing this work online. I didn't know how to balance it. So her being a part of our home and everything was truly so beautiful, not just for myself, but also for her. She just became this other person besides my mom that cared about this baby, maybe not as much, but close enough that I could text her the cute little faces the baby was making that all my friends were probably so annoyed with me talking about. But she was this person that cared so much. I ended up hiring her as my assistant because I'm like, anybody that I can delegate this kind of stuff to is somebody that I want to keep around. And so she's been with me for like 2 years now. And it's still a big part of Lemmy's life, a big part of our family's life. She's so close with the kids and with us in general. And it's just something I felt a lot of guilt. I felt a lot of guilt about having help because I've never had that before.
Yeah. I love the way that you put that, though. Just like someone to come help hold this baby, because some babies just want to be held all the time.
Yeah.
And I always say that finding childcare, and even as kids get older, choosing schools is one of the hardest parenting things you have to do. But when you find the right fit, it is like the best feeling.
It is.
So heartwarming. Like you said, it's just bringing in another person to love them and to make you feel supported. So it's truly the greatest.
And it makes me a better parent.
Yes,
like I recognize so much that like motherhood is not built on how much time you spend with your kid, but the quality in which you do.
Yeah.
When I look at my own daughters, I don't want their life to feel like it stops when you become a mother or a parent. I want them to feel like they can still chase their dreams of doing things outside of motherhood and still have it. And so this was a really big, like, instead of do as I say, not as I do, I really came face to face. Like, I have to let myself have help, and I have to let myself have a village and really share this experience. And I think a lot of people feel threatened by having somebody come into your child's life and help, because then you're like, am I being replaced? But now I feel so great when I leave on a work trip or I'm working for the day or anything else is going on, because I know that I have set up a support system that my daughter just doesn't. All my kids, they don't even flinch. They're so happy to change from one care to the other because they feel safe and comfortable. And that's a village that we set up for them. And that's a village that we have, leaned on over time. My mom now has Lemmy 3 days a week, and she's genuinely sad on the days that she doesn't have her. And I'm so happy that when I walk away from Lemmy and leave her with her Nana, that she's having like a beautiful bonding experience with somebody else. That doesn't threaten my role whatsoever. It just gives other people an opportunity to lean into this little one's life too. And I feel so much more confident as a parent knowing that it is not all on me, and it never should have been in the first place.
Yeah.
Even like my husband and I now, I do like the mornings and he does the night, and we swap who makes dinner at nighttime. We're sharing in our domestic responsibilities. It's not, you're the mom, this is your role, this is how you're going to do it. We both have careers. We're both honoring of those careers, and we're doing our best to raise this family together and have that village to come alongside and support us in it. And it's been something that I genuinely wish that there was less guilt around, because I'm so grateful for it. It's made me a better person, a better parent, a better friend, daughter, all of the above.
Yeah. And those are all things that contribute to better mental health, right? Like you didn't have the postpartum depression, and that could have looked very different if you didn't have support. So
I also just want to acknowledge quickly, because a big reason I was a stay-at-home parent the first time was because we couldn't afford childcare.
Right.
So not everybody, there's always that conversation. I wish I could have stayed home with my kids, and other people saying, I wish I could have taken my kid to daycare. We had 3 kids. We were a single income family. There was not enough money that I could make in a day to replace the cost of childcare. So I stayed home out of financial obligation, and I loved it for the time that I was in it. But when I talk about that support system that I have now, I also have to speak into the access to being able to afford that, because that's not something, or even having family in town, that changed the dynamic of that support we were able to have, which is why I think it's important that we really acknowledge and don't say what's best. That's something I've really had to, even with birth, anything, there's no one right path to parenthood, birth, any of it. There's so many paths, and you just have to choose the ones that are right for you along the way, even if it's a different right from somebody else, because what was right for me 10 years ago is very different from what's right now. So I could never say what's best or what's right for anybody. We've just really been riding the tides of what's been best for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so much just depends on your family situation, having relatives nearby. Even I talk to people in small towns or in other countries where like they might have these longer parental leave policies, but then there's basically no preschools and childcare until a certain age. So like, even if you want to work, you really can't. And so it's like, everybody has their challenges, and hearing other people's stories and how you navigated it, that hopefully can help some people with making decisions when they have to.
Exactly. Yeah. And we ended up putting Lemmy into daycare at 18 months old, and it only lasted 3 months. And that made me feel like a massive failure. But the reality was there were so many viruses going around that every time I had any sort of work commitment, we would have to pull her out to prevent our entire family, the mushroom effect of having one kid in a daycare and having 4 kids in total.
Right.
She spent more days at home and us scrambling in the mornings when she would have a fever than we did her actually being in school. So the right decision for us was actually to pull her back out and me to pull back a little bit from work so I could have her at home a couple days a week, and my mom would have her a few days as well. And that's how we ended up making it work for now. So even when we thought we had that path that was going to work, it also didn't work, and we had to readjust. And it's not to say that she wouldn't thrive in that environment had we had more time for her immune system to catch up. But at the time, we were in such a scramble. And by month 3, we were so exhausted by that scramble that I felt a lot of peace pulling her out, but also a lot of guilt and admitting to people it didn't work out for us.
Yeah.
And that was hard too. But now looking back at it, I'm really grateful that we made the decision that we did, because now I feel like we can at least plan for our days as opposed to those surprise viruses that came up. And we're not talking like little stuff. It was like RSV and hand, foot, and mouth, and like COVID a million times. It was just like too much on an immune system that had never experienced a germ before. So it was a lot all at once.
Yeah, it's a lot on the health of the baby and the family. And then also, there's nothing more frustrating than paying for childcare and then never getting to use it because they're getting sick at childcare.
Yeah, I think we got like 11 or 12 days in 3 months.
Right.
So,
That's the worst.
It didn't work out for us. Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah. These pandemic babies have some catching up to do for sure in the immune system department.
Sure do.
All right. Well, before we go, I want to be sure and talk about the work that you do. You have so much going on.
Always.
And our audiences overlap so much. So just share kind of the best place for people that haven't heard of your work to find you and to get started listening to your podcasts and all of that.
Yeah, so I'm at the Birds Papaya on Instagram. That's sort of my wheelhouse. I'm in stories a lot. And my Instagram is my journal. It's just that place where I process things in real time. I write about stuff either reflectively or what I'm going through at the moment. So whether it's weight gain, postpartum, whether it's embracing those stretch marks, rocking whatever is going on that day, my ethos is not to always feel like you have to look a certain way before we show up in our lives, but figuring out how we do. And that doesn't always mean wearing the bikini, but sometimes means wearing whatever it means for us to actually show up in our lives and not live with that regret that I do from really keeping myself at home from where I felt about my body, especially in experiences and memories with my kids. I also have my podcast, the Papaya Podcast, where I just get to ask curious questions from a lot of people in totally different life stories than I have, and really learning along the way as well. So those are the 2 main places to find me. And everything is truly, I have no idea what I'm going to post tomorrow. I have no idea what's going to come in the next year. There's no goalpost there, because it truly has been a journey of me really figuring out what it means to live in a body, to exist in a body, and to embrace the changes that come along the way, even imperfectly.
Yes. Well, you do such a great job of it. And I feel like anytime you share something kind of birth related, I'll be getting tagged in your posts. And
really? Oh my gosh.
So I'm excited that we were able to get you on the podcast and have these stories recorded.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been even 2 years later. I think birth is one of those things that when we get an opportunity to talk about, it's like one of the biggest days of your entire life, but people sort of stop listening after those first few hours after you've had a baby. And so to be able to sit and really be like, wow, I'm really proud of what happened. I'm really proud of how far I've come and have the space to talk about it means a lot. I think your podcast means a lot to so many people. So thank you for what you do as well.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I feel like because of what I do, wherever I go, people tell me their birth stories. So I'll be at a conference and I'll be having women in their 60s and women in their 20s, both like, oh, you won't believe what happened at my birth. Like you said, it's just something you don't forget. So
yeah, you don't forget. Truly.
I never get tired of hearing the stories. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing today.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a great conversation. Thank you so much again, Sarah. And now we are going to hear from Julie all about Needed, today's sponsor. They have amazing prenatal supplement products, and I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. Be sure to stay tuned till the end because we have a giveaway coming up as well. All right, let's hear from Julie. Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today to chat with me about Needed.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we've been sharing about Needed for a couple months now, and I'm excited to kind of dive deeper into the products you guys offer. But before we get to that, can you share with listeners just a little bit about you and your role at Needed?
Yeah, sure. So I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Needed. I started Needed with my business school classmate and friend, Ryan. And day to day, I oversee marketing for us, and Ryan oversees our product development and operations side of the business. But yeah, I am a mom of 2 girls. I live in LA, and that's where Ryan lives as well. But our team is mostly moms, and we are located all throughout the country.
I love it. It sounds like the perfect business to kick off when you have 2 little ones.
Absolutely.
All right. So tell us a little bit about how the company got started and what your goals were with creating it.
Yeah. So Ryan and I met when we were in business school, and both of us were trained nutritionists and obsessed lifelong nutrition nerds. Neither of us were practicing nutritionists at the time, but we were really the most health conscious among our friends. And we were both really shocked to discover through nutritional testing that we had massive nutrient deficiencies. And both of us had multiple nutrient deficiencies, like 5 to 10 each. And they were both in like a critical deficiency stage. And that was really surprising to us because we were doing what we thought were all of the right things, like shopping at the farmer's market and preparing our own food and taking supplements. So we dove into the research and discovered that we were not alone in having these needs. Over 95% of women have nutrient deficiencies, and that's despite 97% of women in this life stage, the perinatal stage, taking a prenatal vitamin. So that was a real aha moment for us. And at the same time, many of our friends were starting their fertility, pregnancy, or postpartum journeys, and a lot of them were struggling with, the day-to-days of finding a prenatal, and then also on the other side, some real complications of pregnancy or difficulty with feeling their best or difficulty conceiving. And it was shocking how much of an afterthought nutrition was. We knew from our nutritional training that nutrition can be so supportive of a healthy pregnancy, conception, postpartum, really all facets of a mom and baby's health. But nutrition wasn't being used in a therapeutic way. It was like, just take a prenatal vitamin. They're all the same. It doesn't really matter which one you take. And that just isn't true. So that was the aha moment that led us to decide to redesign the prenatal vitamin and the other products that women need from the ground up. And that is really important because most products on the market aren't custom formulated. They're really just a copy of what's easily available, something called whitelisting, which basically means that a product is produced in a stock way, and then brands are just putting their own branding on top of them. And that's how we got to the place that we're at now, where most prenatal vitamins aren't meeting women's needs. And we really wanted to be the solution to that, which meant custom formulating our products. And to do so, we work closely with perinatal nutrition and health practitioners that are regularly testing women's nutrient and hormone levels in this life stage to know what is optimal and what's needed. That's how we landed on the company name, because we were really trying to help women meet their needs in an optimal way, not just meet the bare minimums.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And I love that the website is thisisneeded.com. Okay, so then let's focus on, you have a lot of different products and plans that can be catered to different stages, but I think a great place to start is the complete plan. So let's talk a little bit about that. And especially I'm interested in the choice to have a powder for the prenatal multi versus a capsule.
Yeah. So the first products that we launched in 2020 make up our complete plan. It's a 4-part protocol that includes a prenatal vitamin, an omega-3, a pre and probiotic, and a collagen protein. We included all 4 because they really are the foundational products that meet your micronutrient, microbiome, and macronutrient needs. Protein is such an important component of a healthy pregnancy to support blood pressure, blood sugar regulation, and then postpartum for healing. Collagen protein is really uniquely suited to do so. And what I didn't realize until I was in this life stage is that one of the amino acids in collagen, glycine, is conditionally essential in pregnancy, meaning your body can't produce it on its own. It needs to consume it through food. And the placenta is actually made up of collagen. So we're not including it just for the skin and gut health benefits that collagen is known for, but really for this foundational need that that women have in this life stage. And to answer your question around powder, we started with a powder prenatal because of a few reasons. One is that a lot of women struggle to take capsules, especially in pregnancy. And if you have any form of nausea or indigestion, that can be even more difficult. But also with a powder, we are able to dose nutrients in their optimal form and in dosages that are really meaningful. It's kind of a space constraint to fit everything that you need in a prenatal into 1 or 2 pills a day or a handful of gummies. It's just not possible, especially for some of the most critical nutrients like choline. It's a really bulky nutrient. And so what you see most commonly is that prenatal vitamins don't include it, or they dose it at a really small amount that isn't meaningful. And we wanted to dose at the optimal levels and in optimal forms that your body can readily use and put to work. And the powdered form was really an optimal way to be able to deliver that. We now offer our prenatal vitamin in 3 different forms, though. We have a powder, we have a capsule form, and we have what we call our essentials, which is a pared down version of our capsule prenatal for times when you just can't take more than a couple pills a day. So it's perfect for first trimester nausea, or for some women who have nausea all throughout their pregnancy. Our essentials version is a really popular choice.
Right, because to your point, to getting enough of what you need of those nutrients for the main capsule option, it's 8 capsules a day, which feels like a lot probably to some people.
A lot of women will break it up. They'll take like 2 or 3 in the morning, and then a few more with lunch and a few more before bedtime. So that divided dosing can be a good way to get in all 8 capsules in a day. But I personally really like having the flexibility to switch between powder and capsules. Sometimes if I make a smoothie in the morning, I like to take my powder, but on days where I don't make a smoothie, or where, I'm just in the mood for capsules instead, or having something different for breakfast than a smoothie, it's nice to be able to take the capsules. And you can actually take a half a dose of each to divide it up. So there's a lot of flexibility between the options.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Yeah, I know when I was pregnant, I struggled with my iron levels. And so I was always trying to really put a lot of spinach in my smoothie in the morning. And it would have been so great to be able to just add in my prenatal and feel like I was accomplishing this big thing first thing every day.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned iron. Iron is a really interesting nutrient. It's a nutrient that many women will need in pregnancy, but not throughout the entire stage. Some women need more than others. Our bodies are unique. And so we actually offer iron as a separate add-on, not as an ingredient in our prenatal vitamin, because iron and calcium compete for absorption in the body. You want both, but you want to take them at different times of day. And for those who are really prone to nausea, iron can make nausea worse. So it's helpful to be able to take it right before you go to bed instead of having it in your prenatal vitamin and, that making you nauseous when you take it first thing in the day. So our iron is a really popular add-on. And in general, we're building products that work together in a system so that you can customize your routine to meet your needs. The complete plan, those 4 products are the core, but we have other targeted nutrient add-ons like our iron. We also offer a targeted choline add-on and a vitamin D for times when you need more of those nutrients. And then we also have products that meet specific needs like sleep support and stress support and hydration support. And our latest product, which I'm super excited about, our immune support, which is a product that you can take during pregnancy, postpartum, but you can also give it to your kids.
Nice.
And for those who are listening who are moms, many of us are very familiar with the fact that kids get sick on average 6 to 12 times per year. And if you have more kids at home, you typically have more sick days. There's some really interesting research around what fraction of the year your household has some form of a virus, and it goes up and up and up with each kid. So I love our immune support. It's an elderberry flavored powder that has prebiotics, postbiotics, zinc, and elderberry, and it tastes amazing. And that's a really good example of the way we're thinking about designing products that really meet your needs. We want to be the brand that can support women all throughout this journey, from fertility through pregnancy, through postpartum, through maybe considering having more kids in the future, and growing with our consumer as she becomes a mom and goes through the next stages of her life.
Yeah, and everything is just so clearly laid out on the website. I just really encourage everyone to go check it out because it's very easy to navigate. Everything is clearly labeled as to when you might need things, whether it's vegan or vegetarian. I just really love what you guys have put together as far as the user experience as well. And I've personally tried several of the products, and everything, especially the powders I've tried, have been really tasty. The sleep one I've been loving. That has magnesium in it, right?
Yeah, magnesium, L-theanine, chamomile, and glycine. All of them are really supportive of relaxation and sleep. And most importantly, there's no melatonin in it. You don't have any of that next day sluggishness that you can get with some sleep products. And it's pregnancy safe, which is amazing for if you are dealing with pregnancy insomnia, which I certainly did with both of my pregnancies.
Yes, I would have loved to have had that as like a little nightcap during pregnancy.
It's also awesome when you're, when I personally, when I was, doing night feedings, I felt like I could fall asleep at the drop of a pin, but it was awesome for my husband to be able to take because he didn't have those hormonal, sleepiness that happens when you're breastfeeding or pumping and you have the oxytocin release, which can make you really drowsy. So he loved taking it in those early newborn days to be able to fall back asleep after being woken up at night by a hungry baby.
I don't know. I'd probably be like hoarding it from my husband, but I'm sure you have plenty in your house.
That is one benefit of being the founder of the company. We're always stocked up.
Yes. All right. Well, any final words or things you want to highlight?
Maybe just one other thing. We've been talking a lot about the products that Needed offers, which we're really proud to be recommended by practitioners. We have over 3,000 practitioners that recommend our products. But the other huge part of our mission is to help empower women and educate them. So much of this journey is overwhelming, and it can be so difficult to know what nutrition you need at what stage. And oftentimes we hear that women aren't getting enough of that information from their OB visits or sometimes from their midwife visits as well. And so we're really building through our practitioner collective, we're building an educational resource via our website, via our social media, where you can come and get expert information about meeting your needs through nutrition and through other things in this life stage, like making decisions about where to birth or decisions about what kind of postpartum care you need. So I would really encourage listeners to check out those educational resources. One that I'll just mention that's a free resource that we're really happy to be able to provide is the most comprehensive review of prenatal vitamins. There are a lot of prenatals on the market. And through our practitioner community, we've reviewed over 75 of the leading ones. So if you have questions about the prenatal vitamin that you're taking or a couple that you're considering, you can check out that resource via our website, thisisneeded.com, and download it and talk to your practitioner about it. Or if you have any follow-up questions, you can always reach out to our team. Our customer support team is amazing, and it's staffed by trained perinatal nutritionists. So we really have that expert level of information throughout all aspects of our company.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, I know many of our listeners are very into evidence-based information and are, big research nerds. So that sounds like a great resource. So again, people just head over to thisisneeded.com, and we do have a coupon code right now. It's birth hour for 20% off, which I will be sure to link to where you're listening to this podcast and also on the website. Thank you so much, Julie, for your time today. It was so great chatting with you.
Thank you for having me. As a longtime listener, it's really a pleasure to be able to work with you.
Okay, I'm so excited to be working with Needed and so impressed with their offerings for prenatal supplements, and even more excited because they are giving away 2 complete plans to 2 lucky winners, and we're going to be running that giveaway over on Instagram. So just head over to The Birth Hour on Instagram. The giveaway is on a reel of me making a protein shake. I've been loving using their protein collagen and their prenatal multivitamin powder in my protein shakes. And if you want more information from today's episode, you can always head over to thebirthhour.com and search for Sarah's name in the search bar to find her show notes page. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.